Hey, this is attorney Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein. Today we're going to be talking about the steps you need to take if you want to create a business in the United States from outside the United States. So you are non-resident of the United States, but you want to do business here in the US. So what are all the steps you need to take? So what I'm going to be doing is leading you through all those steps and talking about the ways you would handle it yourself if you're going to handle it yourself. Now you can hire services to do that. And my top recommendation if you're outside the United States and you want to set up a business in the United States is Doula. They are a sponsor of this video. I am an affiliate of them and there are links below, but you can do this all yourself. It just is a lot more steps and a lot more things you're gonna have to figure out. So let's go through all those steps. And I'll also kind of talk a little bit about if you hire Doula or another company like that, which of those steps they're going to handle for you and what things you're actually gonna end up having to do yourself anyway. All right, so first thing you have to do, if you want to form a business in the United States, typically because you're going to be selling products or services in the United States, a lot of times people are doing things online, right? And they have customers or clients who are here in the US, and it makes it a lot easier for you to do transactions if you have a US business and a US bank account and all those kinds of things. Then the first thing you actually have to do is decide the kind of entity you're going to form. So you're either going to form an LLC or a corporation most of the time. That's what you're going to be forming. Generally speaking, a corporation, a C corporation, is if you're going to be trying to get investors. If you're going to be pitching VC, your goal is to take this company public someday, then you want a C corporation. For most other people, an LLC is much better because it is simpler, it is usually less expensive, there is pass-through tax treatment. So the C corporation has to pay taxes on all of its profits, but the LLC, all the profits pass to you. Now, I'm not going to go into the tax stuff here. That's a whole different video. And actually, I'm not an expert on tax things, but it does radically change how taxes work for you. So generally speaking, I say if you're going to be pitching VC, looking for investors, you get a C corp. For everybody else, an LLC, a limited liability company, works great. I also have a couple clients who will get a C corp just because they're in a country where LLCs and things like that don't exist and they're more comfortable with that. And of course, that can also be an issue. But the LLC is much more simple and will be less expensive. So you've decided which one you're going to do. Now, before you can create this, you have to get a registered agent in the state where you're going to create it. Oh, and I do have to back up. You have to pick a state too. Most of the time, if you're outside the United States, you're not going to have inventory here. You're not going to have a location here. There's no physicality tied to the US. Then you can pick whichever state you want. If you're going to have a physicality, if you're going to have an office, if you're going to have a store, if you're going to have inventory somewhere, you pick that state because you have ties to that state. You're going to have to register there anyway. Otherwise, for a C Corp, if you want outside investors, you go with Delaware. That's the end of that. But with LLCs, you can really go anywhere. A lot of people go to a state like Wyoming. It has a lot of benefits. I've also seen people go with Nevada and New Mexico. There's a couple other states that kind of are trendy for people to form in from outside the United States or who are, digital nomads or something. Generally speaking, you want to look at a state that doesn't have state taxes, which is one of the reasons we look at somewhere like Wyoming or Nevada. You also want to look at state where you can have privacy, where you don't have to list your personal name on the documents. And as the owner, that can be important for a lot of people. So you'll have to go to the pluses and minuses. But for a lot of people, the LLC is in Wyoming or Delaware, and the C Corp is in Delaware. So you've picked which state. You've picked as an LLC or corporation, and now you get the registered agent. The registered agent is a person or a business who is your agent in that location, in that state, who is authorized to accept legal documents on your behalf. This actually doesn't happen that often, so usually people aren't going to need to actually receive this, but it's a requirement to create the LLC in that state. Not every state requires it, but almost all of them do, so we're just going to assume that it will in your case, and it will in Delaware or Wyoming, for example, or Nevada, for example. You can just Google registered agent in that state. The fees range from $99 a year to, I've seen $349 a year. It depends on what else the company's providing, and also I don't know why some of them charge a lot more. It's all over the place. You want one that's dependable, that has a good reputation. So if they do get served with legal papers, you actually get them. And you want one that has some kind of online system so you can go on there and see whatever documents you get. So you have that set up. Now you're going to form your LLC corporation. You go to the website for the state and of which state you've picked. And then you can use their online interface to file that. You can do that from anywhere in the world. You have to make sure you put in all the right information. And some of the information you may not yet have. And this kind of goes to another one of the things you're going to have to set up is some of the stuff that goes in there is an address. So if you hire a registered agent or if you hire a service to set this all up for you, a lot of times they will provide the address, the local address for this. But if you're doing it yourself, before you file this form, you're going to need to get an address. Now, you can put the mailing address to be some other country, whatever, but you're going to need to have an address that's local to that state. And sometimes the registered agent will let you use their address for that, or sometimes they don't. And if you hire a service to file it for you, a lot of times they'll have an address that they're going to use for that. And so these are the registered agent, and the filing of the forms is something that a company like Doula would do for you, and they would tell you what the stuff goes in what boxes and what information they need for you. Obviously, if you're doing it yourself, those are things you're going to be filing the papers yourself, even though you'll have to hire a registered agent somewhere else. So the next thing you have to do is get an EIN, an employer identification number. Now, you don't have to be an employer to need an EIN. It's just the name that the IRS gives to the number that is assigned to that company for all kinds of tax purposes, as well as everywhere else. So in the United States, human beings typically have a social security number or an ITIN. A social security number is for US citizens, people have a green card, people are authorized to work in the United States, stuff like that. And an ITIN is someone who is usually, well, they're not authorized to work in the United States. They need a tax ID number, an ITIN, individual taxpayer ID number to file tax forms or something. A LLC or corporation has an EIN to be that tax number. Now, if you have employees, you definitely leave it, but you also are going to need it just to file not just tax forms, but like you end up giving that number everywhere. If you need a business license, if you need an account for this or that, you're going to need that number. Now, if you have a social security number or an ITIN, you can apply for the EIN at the IRS website and you get it immediately. But if you don't have a social security number or ITIN, then you can't. It has to be done by mail or by fax. So this is something that a lot of times I'll have my clients hire someone to do the EIN if they're outside the United States, because they can facilitate the paperwork getting through. But is it possible to file it yourself? Yes, you can file it yourself. It will take a while to get. I recommend faxing it over mailing it just because the mail can get lost and it can go a big pile, but it will take weeks, if not maybe even months to get it. You can hire someone to do that for you, which will make it be a bit faster. And there are companies that just do that. And then also if you use Doula or somewhere like that, you would get the EIN and part of the formation package, right? So you have to get obviously the LLC or corporation has to be formed and the EIN has to be done before you can do any of the other steps, okay? So the next thing you're gonna do is you have to know the tax status that you want for this business. Now, you may be just going with the default. A corporation's tax status default is a C Corp, and an LLC's tax status default is pass-through, which could be, it's kind of like a sole proprietorship being taxed, or a partnership if there's multiple owners, and then it just passes through. You can actually have an LLC that elects to be taxed as a C Corp, which sounds weird, but that is something that's possible to do if it makes sense from a tax perspective, but you would want to talk to a tax person. But a form has to be filed to that election. If you just want the default, it just happens automatically. Now, there are going to be some forms that also have to get filed with the state, sometimes right away and sometimes later. These are typically kind of bundle this into compliance things. So some companies that you hire will file these annual reports, these statements of information, whatever it is, with the state for you as part of the formation package or part of some kind of annual compliance package. Doula does these forms as part of their, overall compliance. And these are required to do. If you don't file them, then your LLC or corporation no longer exists because you eventually become suspended and for not filing these documents and to pay a bunch of late fees. The things typically, it's just disclosing, it depends on the state, but it's updating your address, it's updating what kind of business you do. In some states, you have to say who the owners are and what their locations are. It's just a form that gets filed and you have to pay more money to the state, is the short version of that. So it's not a big deal, but it has to be done usually every year. There are some places where it's every other year, but just assume that it has to be done every year. Next thing you're gonna be looking at is your formation documents. So for an LLC, it has to have an operating agreement. For a corporation, you're going to need bylaws, minutes for the board of directors, minutes for the shareholders. You're going to need stock certificates, all that kind of stuff. Now, for a lot of people, you're really just going to use a template that gets modified. And in a lot of ways, that's actually good, because you don't want to like create language from scratch when all that language already exists. These are just contracts fundamentally, but they show that your business is legit. Now for a corporation, all those things that I talked about are required. For an LLC in most states, you're not required to have an operating agreement, and none of these things get filed with the state. They're things that you keep in your corporate or LLC paperwork. But you definitely want an operating agreement because it makes your business look more legit if it ever comes to a debate about whether or not you actually had an LLC. And also it's an important thing to have so you know how your business works, especially if you have multiple owners. But even if it's just you, you want this agreement I know it's agreement with yourself. It sounds very weird, but you want this agreement to show that your business is being run in the correct manner. And it shows how voting works, who takes responsibility for what's going to happen if the business gets shut down, all that kind of stuff. And typically, if you hire a company to do this, they will give you templates that you can use to create those documents. And so if you hire a lawyer, they can create things from scratch. If you have something really complicated where you're doing some complicated vesting or something with multiple owners, you may want to hire a lawyer to actually create unique documents to address those complexities. But for most people, modifying a template is going to work fine. And typically when you hire a company like Dula, you're going to get all kinds of templates that you're going to be able to modify to create your operating agreement or any other agreements you need. Now you're also, before you do the next step, which is all the money things, banking, payments, all that stuff, you're going to need an address and you're going to need a phone number. Typically you need those things to set up all your banking and things like that. So getting a mailing address, there's all kinds of virtual mailbox places now. So I recommend using one of those virtual mailbox places. I personally use Anytime Mailbox, but there's a whole bunch of different ones. It depends on what exact address you want. Typically how it works is that your mail goes to this location and then you are able to check it online. Now, some of them, you do have to sign a document with the United States Post Office that has to be notarized. So you'll have to look at one where that is going to be possible for you to do from another country. So all those different businesses handle that a little bit differently. And sometimes it can be bundled with whoever you hire to form the LLC if you hire someone to do that. Your phone number. So there's a couple different, you can Google this, there's a couple different companies that provide phone numbers. Some of them you have to be located in the United States and have a US cell phone, but some of them you don't. And so you have to just I recommend Googling pricing things, but you definitely want a phone number and you definitely want a mailing address. Once you get that stuff all set up, so your LLC exists, you have an EIN, you have some kind of mailing address, which either through the company or you set up independently, you have a phone number, now you can go ahead and set up banking. My top recommendation for banking is Mercury, for someone who's outside the United States. And actually, that's who I use for my banking for both of my business entities, for my YouTube businesses and my law firm. I use Mercury. I think it works really well. And you can set it up online and they know how to handle setting up a bank account for someone outside the United States. Otherwise, if you want a US bank that's like a physical location like Bank of America or something, you have to come here and do it in person and it's a whole thing. So I highly recommend using a bank like Mercury. Now, by the way, Mercury is technically not a bank. It actually uses US banks where the money is and it diversifies it across a whole bunch of different banks. That way, if one of them has problems, then your money isn't all put in one place. It's actually diversified over a whole bunch of different banks. So just something to be aware of. Mercury is technically not a bank. It is the system that puts your money in a bunch of different banks. You're gonna need to set up being able to take payments. How that works really depends on your kind of business. You could be on Shopify and just use their Shopify payment system, or what I do and what I have for my law firm is I have Stripe. Stripe is a great system, very robust for accepting payments on your website. But it really depends on the kind of business you have for how your payments are going to work. Now, if you want PayPal, my understanding the last time I looked is that you have to have either a social security number or an ITIN to open a PayPal account. It can make a lot of sense to have a PayPal account because a lot of people want to pay you that way, and it integrates in some things like eBay, of course, very easily. But if you're going to do that, you're going to need to get your ITIN, and you typically will want to hire somebody to help you do all the paperwork for that, and it will take weeks, if not maybe a couple months, to get the ITIN from the IRS. Okay, so one of the next things you're going to need to look at is all the tax things. So it's very difficult to try to explain taxes to someone outside the United States because I think our tax system is different than a lot of other places because the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, puts the burden on the individual taxpayer, whether it's a company or a person, to file all these different forms. They don't tell you what your taxes are. You have to calculate it yourself, and then you get in trouble if you're wrong, which is really harsh, right? It's a really harsh rule. So you definitely want to make sure that all these tax forms get filed correctly and when they're supposed to get filed. Whether or not you actually have to pay taxes on this income depends on its ties to the United States. That is beyond the scope of this video, but there's definitely going to be forms that you have to file. So I highly recommend you hire someone to do this. I don't think, I mean, even if you're in the United States, it can be very difficult to do. But if you're not here and used to filing all these forms, the penalty for it is very high. So I highly recommend you hire a service. Now, Dual actually is launching a whole system for all of this where it includes bookkeeping, accounting, file all the tax forms, everything, and just to kind of make it easier for you. So it's like a big bundle of all the different things you need to do. So because you need to have bookkeeping, which is just, I mean, you can do your own bookkeeping. It can be a spreadsheet. It can be written on a piece of paper. That's a terrible idea, but technically you can. You have to keep books for this business, which have to be separate from your personal finances. Now, you can use a bookkeeping system that, I mean, there's tons of them online, right? Some of them are even free or very, very low cost. The issue is that you want whoever you hire to do your taxes to be comfortable with this bookkeeping system, like the reports and things like that, because you're going to need to get all the data from the bookkeeping system to whoever's doing your taxes. So it can make a lot of sense to have that be the same entity. So with some accountants, if you hire an individual accountant, they use QuickBooks. A lot of accountants use QuickBooks. Some of them use other there's all kinds of apps out there, right? And a lot of them will have attached different accountants and tax preparers that integrate with their bookkeeping system. And the idea is that it makes it a lot easier. I remember years ago when I actually do my own taxes right now, but when I hired someone to do my taxes, that they actually had two different pricing mechanisms. One was if they did your bookkeeping, they knew that the books were done correctly and they were going to get all the data correctly. And then when they did the taxes, it was going to be easy for them. So they charged one price. But if you were just giving them all this stuff, you know, receipts in a shoebox was what some people did. I don't know if anyone does that now. People even have paper receipts hardly ever, but if you just gave them a whole bunch of stuff and they were going to have to put all that together, or even reports from some bookkeeping system that they weren't used to, or spreadsheets, they charged more money because they had to go clean that up before they can do the taxes. And so I do recommend making sure that whoever you hire to do the taxes, either it's the same company that's doing your bookkeeping, so it's all integrated, it's all together, you don't have to worry about it at all, or you talk to them and say what bookkeeping system you need to do so you can make it match up, so you don't have difficulties when they're filing tax returns. Also, make sure that they're filing all the tax returns you need, because there are some tax returns that just do once a year. And then there's some things that get filed at other times. Also, this also depends if you have employees. And this is another thing that I also wanted to talk about. If you're going to have people with, you know, here in the United States who are going to be shipping stuff for you, salespeople, whatever it is, then you're going to need to do all the paperwork in hiring an employee. So there's paperwork that gets filed with the state to become an employer. Then there's paperwork that gets filed because you have employees for each employee. And then obviously you have to run payroll. I recommend Gusto for running payroll. That's who I use for my own payroll to pay myself. And I've used them for many years back when they were very tiny. I think they were just here in California for a while, and now they're in not just all 50 states, but they're also can pay people in other countries too. If you have employees, there's a whole bunch of employment tax things that have to be done, which is why I recommend for employment stuff that you hire Gusto, because they do that things. They do the employment taxes. But if you hire someone to do your business taxes, that is separate. I know it's like, there's so many different levels of things. Now, other things that you might need. The other things you might need only really depend on if you have a physical location in the United States. So if you have a physical location, which could be something as small as inventory here in the United States, then you're good, or a salesperson, you know, then you're going to need to probably have a business license, but it depends on the state or city. Some business licenses are done by states. Sometimes they're done by cities. Sometimes you're not required to have one at all. You'll probably need to get a seller's permit, which is like for sales taxes. Some states have sales taxes. Some states don't. That is complicated, but you typically only need to deal with sales taxes when you have some sort of physical tie in a state or you're selling huge amounts of money in a state. So when you're just starting out, you don't usually need to file this everywhere unless you have a physical location. So those are I know that long list, that is the initial things you will need to set up if you want to create a business in the United States from outside the United States. So is it possible to do all these things yourself? Yes, you can definitely arrange all these things yourself. One thing you can't do yourself is get a trademark, registered trademark, or a patent. You actually have to hire a lawyer in the United States if you're not a resident of the United States. You don't have a domicile here. Otherwise, these things you can all do yourself or hire someone individually to do. You have to hire a registered agent. That is one thing that you can't do for yourself. All these other things that you can actually hire an individual person to do your bookkeeping or do it yourself. You can hire an individual tax preparer or accountant instead of, or you could even file your taxes yourself, I guess. The issue is that's a whole lot of things to learn about. And one of the problems as a small business owner, and I know this as a small business owner when you're starting up new business, is you're trying to start this business to provide this product or service. So you have to learn about the product or service and be an expert on that. And then you also are learning about how to run a business. And it's a lot of things to do. And it is good to find trusted partners in some of these different areas so that you can hire, so you can actually just be selling the stuff, right? And not having to deal with also filing this tax form. So as I said, you can do all these things yourself, but it can be helpful to hire someone to do them. So the kind of stuff that doula will actually do, they have different packages. Some of them are for just forming the business entity. They also have this total compliance package that's for all the other things that you need to do during the year. They are now launching new things about doing bookkeeping and taxes for the whole year. The idea is that it can be kind of a one-stop shop where you just go in and they do all the stuff for you. So if you're interested in working with doula on all these different things that you need to do, I have a link below where you can learn more about their services. You can get as a discount code for getting 10% off. And you can also just do a free initial consultation, which I think can be very helpful to figure out if they're a good fit for you, what you think of the company, ask questions that you need answered before you go ahead and get started and hire someone to be a partner with you in forming and running your business. So if you have any questions about what I talked about today, feel free to ask them in the comments below and I'll try to point you in the right direction. Thumbs up if you found this video helpful, subscribe for more videos like this, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.